You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with this week's amazing guest, who has done more in her military career than most people have done in a lifetime. We'll get to her in just a moment. She's also part of an amazing foundation for women's veterans. We'll get to that coming up. Just our normal set of reminders. Please go follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. As well, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can watch all of our episodes there as well. So if you're looking to watch a video version of it, it's all on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe as well to the YouTube channel. Don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. You'll be redirected to Amazon. You can do all your normal Amazon shopping. Same thing on your smartphone. It'll redirect you to your app. All the credit card information is saved. Very, very user-friendly. But you do all your normal Amazon shopping. You go to hazardground.com first. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we donate a percentage back to some of the great charities and organizations featured here on the Hazard Ground, like the one you'll hear about today. Continue to give us Apple reviews. We need to keep climbing up the top 100 Apple podcast list. Hopefully we can crack it, but you gotta leave us the reviews, guys. Doesn't have to be a long one. Give us 5 stars. Tell us why you love the show. Tell us what you love about the show, and make sure you do it wherever you get your Apple podcasts. That way we can continue to get pushed up the top 100 Apple podcast list. Of course, don't forget to download the Kill Cliff TV app along with our YouTube channel. That's where you can watch all of our episodes is on the Kill Cliff TV app, and our good friends at Kill Cliff, makers of Kill Cliff clean energy drinks, including products with CBD. Here's their Kill Cliffsicle. Go to killcliff.com and you can order all of your clean energy drinks, and all of their proceeds, or a lot of their proceeds rather, go to benefit the Navy SEAL Foundation. Of course, they were founded and started by our former Navy SEAL. So killcliff.com to get all of your clean energy. Okay, this week's guest, and again, the military world is very sort of serendipitous in a sense where I meet one person and they like the show and they say, this person would be amazing for your podcast. Well, that's how we got to know this guest coming up. She served 37 years in the military and is a retired CW5. She is deployed to Saudi Arabia as part of Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. She was part of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq. She is a registered nurse, holds 2 master's degrees, 2 bachelor's of science degrees, 3 associate's degrees, and a certificate in nonprofit management from Duke University. She attended the Defense Language Institute for both German and Spanish. I could go on and on and on. Let's just say very much she's really, really smart, smarter than me. But she is also the president of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation. This is the only major national memorial honoring the 3 million women who have defended America from the Revolutionary War to today. She's also on the board of directors of the AUSA, Association of the United States Army. She's a senior fellow there as well. Let us welcome in CW5 retired Phyllis Wilson to the Hazard Ground podcast. Phyllis, welcome, and wow.
Yeah, I stay a little busy, but I think everybody does in their own way. You just sort of find where your sweet spot is and keep chasing after it, right?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering, are you actually retired? Because I know it says retired, but like I get the feeling that that's not like a thing for you.
Well, that's the thing that I've learned too in the civilian world now is when we say, I tell most people now I'm an Army veteran, not a retired from the Army, because they think when civilians hear retired, they think, you're sitting on the beach drinking Mai Tais, yes, which would be lovely. I won't lie. But no, I just tell them I'm an Army veteran or that I served. But no, I do work. This is a very full-time job, basically 7 days a week, to raise the money for this charity that operates and maintains the Military Women's Memorial, which sits at the entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. So there's no rest for the wicked, and I must be horrible because I get very little rest.
I've neglected to mention, and I shouldn't have, you were the 5th Command Chief Warrant Officer for the U.S. Army Reserve, which is a major position. And again, being a CW5 in and of itself is incredible, but to hold that high level of one, congratulations again on all your success throughout the military. So how long actually have you been, quote, retired now?
Almost exactly 4 years ago,
okay.
I I could say I hung up my uniform, but I don't. I still have to pull it out and put it on for certain events, of course.
Really?
But yeah, we go to a lot of functions here in the Washington, D.C. area. And depending upon whether it's, I'd rather wear the long dress, but if it needs to be, if I'm asked to wear my uniform or, grand marshal and parades and things, just to make sure that people know that there are women out there that have served. So often, I've parked in places in a veteran spot and been told, hey, that's veteran parking. And I'm thinking, yeah, you want to say, I can read, thank you. But instead I went, yes, sir, thank you. And then they'll ask me if my husband is with me or they'll see I have disabled veteran plates on my car and they'll tell me to thank my husband for his service. And so it's just that constant grind of just trying to encourage people to think, what does a veteran look like anyway? Because that's when they find out I am one. Well, you don't look like a veteran. Mark, what are we supposed to look like?
Yeah, well, I guess tattered and torn is one.
I suppose.
But, more than that again. And it's just, it's crazy that we, after all this and everything that's gone on, that we would even still be stuck in that mindset. Thank your husband for me. Or how about just thank you? It's crazy. She who born the battle, right? So it is, it's amazing everything that you've accomplished. But I ask people to start back at the beginning. And I know it was 4 decades ago, but how'd you end up in the Army?
Hey, thanks for pointing that out. But yes,
you look great. You look great.
It's nobody in my family that I knew of had ever served in the military. My dad was born and raised Amish, horse and buggy Amish.
Oh, wow.
And they're conscientious objectors. So they serve normally in medical community, whether it's stateside or they may go overseas, but they won't carry, typically they wouldn't carry a weapon. And so I really didn't know anything about that, nor did I know anything about college because my dad went through 8th grade. That's all the Amish were required to do. And then they worked and worked and worked. So I think that's where the work ethic comes from. And my mother had graduated high school. She was Catholic. So you can imagine a young man that left the Amish community marrying a Catholic woman. Yes.
I'm a Catholic, so I get it.
Yeah. No, and both have the guilt complex. So you can fathom. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they laid that on thick.
Yes, it's God and guilt. They go hand in hand.
Absolutely. So as I graduated high school and I knew I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but as I started figuring out how long that was going to take and how much it was going to cost, after 2 years of trying to plug my way through community college and realizing this is going to take forever at the pace I'm going, I stopped in at a recruiter's office. And as fate would have it, one of the things they needed, this is before the Berlin Wall came down, and they needed a German linguist. And my dad spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. And I always hated as a kid when they would sit around the old folks and jabber in a foreign language and then just laugh. And you're like, I don't know what they're saying. So the opportunity to learn a language, to get a bonus and to not worry about, lodging, meals, all those kind of things that I was eating cereal for breakfast. I was eating cereal for supper as a kid that had left home and was damned. I was never going to go back home. I was going to make this work. But the Army it was the perfect fit for me at the time. And I turned 21 in basic training. So, I tried for a couple of years. It wasn't like I was fresh out of high school. And thought I'd do 4 years and go back to college and be done. And 37 years later, now I'm done.
Yeah, guilty. I thought I was doing 4 years and done. 23, yeah. I'm still kicking it around. When you told Amish dad and Catholic mom that you had signed up for the military, were they horrified?
Well, I actually had not signed up. I had gone through the book at the recruiters and they had them in numerical sequence. And back then, 95 series were our military police. And I would have had to go a few more pages to get to the signals intelligence voice intercept, MOS. But when I got to, as I was flipping through this big book, this is before computers, right. I'm flipping through it and the MPs, the military police page had a woman in her uniform with a gun on her hip. And I'm like, I want that. That's exactly where I need to be. So I'm like, done deal. And I think thank God my recruiter was at least, I was very naive for a 20-year-old. I was just a kid, more than the typical, I think, very sheltered life. And he said, why don't you go home and talk to your parents? So I did. And my dad went with me the next day. He says, show me the book. And so I showed it to him. And he's like, well, let's keep going. And as fate would have it, just a few more pages later, I got to the 98 series, which was the signals intelligence. And then the recruiter sat up and he said, your ASVAB score was plenty high enough. You could do this if you'd prefer. And that one had a sign-on bonus of $3,500, which in the early 1980s, holy, that's a lot of money because my base pay was $500 a month. So you can see what $3,500 did as far as a lure to get me. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So I spent a great year in Monterey, California after I went through basic. And the Army or the military writ large gets you back for a great assignment where you're basically at college for a year on the coast of California.
Wow.
Very lax. So next assignment, I was sent to Germany, part of 3rd Armored Division, defending that old Fulda Gap from the Soviet Union. And we were in the field all the time. So they got a good balance out of it. I got 1 year of great listening to seals bark at the sea, and then the rest was out in the cold in Germany.
I have to ask you, just because I'm morbidly curious, what Amish skills do you have? Can you churn butter? Can you, the Amish are a different bunch. My own morbid curiosity, knowing a little bit about the Amish, I'm just curious what skills that you learned as a child.
Yeah, growing up, we had a full 1 acre garden. And again, the naivete of being a kid, we were given big bowls to go out and pick the green beans down a long line in the garden. And so we picked all the beans. And about 3 days later, my mom gives us the same big bowl to go back out and pick beans. And we're thinking she's lost her ever-loving mind. Mom, we already picked the beans, because we didn't realize they just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. But we had ducks, we had rabbits that we butchered. Chickens, Dad would take a couple of deer every year. We might, if it was a good year, we did not have much money, might split with some other family of full beef. So we'd have half of that. We were never hungry, but we never lived like high on the hog either. But these were just our chores. We all went out and gathered eggs and, plucked chickens after Mom cut their head off. And these are things that, life skills that doesn't make me flinch. And that's why now to be a nurse, and, some people say, how can you look at blood? I looked at it when I was a little kid. We dressed rabbits. We did all those things. So I think those are wonderful skills that I made sure, even though my boys certainly joined the military as well. But for us, I got my brother to bring a rabbit hutch to my place near Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we raised rabbits. And they learned biology. They learned how to dress, how to skin animals, how to tan hides. So I think those are skills that, personally, I think everybody should know how to do.
Listen, I don't argue with you. I just being a New York guy and growing up near the city, I'm just a call the guy. Like if I want somebody to dress a rabbit, I'll pay somebody else to do it. You dress the rabbit. I'll just eat it whenever it's ready. So different strokes for different folks, right? Anyway, I digress. Back to the military. And I kind of, given where you are now as the president of, the Americans Women Memorial Foundation, when you signed up originally and you looked around, are you going, I'm the only female here? You are unnerved by that?
No, I have 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. And it just seemed like I always ended up having more affinity with my brothers. And so I was a tomboy, and I was that mean kid sister to my older sisters that would cut the hair off their Barbie dolls. I was that one.
Nice.
And so they didn't want anything much to do with me. And they're sitting there painting their nails. They're just a couple of years older than me. And I wasn't to that point yet. So I just tagged along with my younger brothers. And of course, being that little bit older, girls do, physically, I could more than keep up. They had to try to keep up with me at that point. And being around the other boys playing ball, I was a lefty, but we couldn't afford a left-handed glove. And so I learned how to catch with my left hand and the glove, and then take the ball out of the glove, quickly put the glove under my right arm, pull my hand out so I could switch the ball quickly, and then pitch it left-handed because I better throwing. But these are just the things that I think a lot of kids across the country learn how to do. And the boys all accepted me because I was as rugged as they were. And then, of course, as I got a little bit older into my teen years, I became a little bit more of a girly, but I'd say I'm the sports girl as opposed to like I have a sister that's more of the complete diva. She actually was a model. And so that was all her. I'm not good at that kind of thing. So the Army was great. It didn't bother me if I was the only female in a room.
Sure. There wasn't the internet back then, obviously. And, there weren't many books written on how to survive basic training. Now you can go to YouTube and figure it out. But were you in a culture shock when it first started? I mean, obviously it seems physically you were okay, but was there anything about basic training that sort of, threw you off mentally?
No, not for me. Some of the others, we did have a couple of them that came from Queens. And that was interesting because if anybody else was slacking and we had to like on the formation runs, some of these women would fall out of the run. And then of course the whole formation's got to do that fun turnaround and go pick them up. And so you get to run extra distance and you didn't want to run any extra distance. And it turned out, it was the city women that were maybe get right in somebody's face quickly afterwards. It's like, don't make us do that again. You better find a way to suck it up and stay in the formation. And those were the kind of things. And I had women that had very long hair. My hair was very fine and I didn't want to cut it, but it had to stay up off our collar. But, with all the putting your hat on and off, on and off, on and off, your hair starts coming down and they're threatening all the time. They're going to march you to the barber shop and make it get cut off to like the way I wear it now. But I didn't want it back then. And so luckily one of the women that was really good, African-American teammate of mine at Basics, she's like, get your hair wet and let me braid it. And man, she braided it so tightly, had massive headache, but my hair didn't come down. And so I did get to graduate basic training, with waist length hair. And thanks to, it's a team, you find ways to help each other get through it.
So again, it's hard to encapsulate 37 years in a relatively short amount of time. But you graduate from basic, and you go on to be a signal, individual, right? That's what you were.
Military intelligence.
Okay, that was MI back then. Okay,
all right. Yeah, MI.
You use terms that as a logistician I'm not familiar with. I just show me where the battle is, and I'll get you everything you need. But no, So you end up going to AIT and everything else. What happens sort of after that? Unless there was something major of note, I don't want to fast forward too fast, but, kind of give me through the early steps of your career.
Well, like I said, we went to Germany. I had met my husband, the man that would become my husband, while we were out at Defense Language Institute. And just as I was arriving into my first assignment, after all, I had 18 months of training before I actually had an MOS. And so out of a 4-year enlistment, I only had 2.5 years left to serve. But we had met and married while I was still out in California. Then I had to go to Goodfellow Air Force Base for additional training, then to Fort Devens for even more training before I flew over to Germany. By the time I got to Germany, I was 7 months pregnant. And you don't show up to a really tactical Army unit with a belly. It is not a good look for anybody, probably even today, but certainly in the early 80s. My command sergeant major had come from nothing but cavalry units and had never been in a unit previously with any females. So this is 1982, late 82. And he didn't know what the heck to do with me. And fortunately, though, he treated me like any other soldier. And I really admired him, although anybody that knows Command Sergeant Major Peterson from the 525 MI Brigade, they know 533rd MI Battalion, Frankfurt, Germany, early 80s. He was a mean SOB. But he taught me a lot of things. And in his own stoic and sometimes what was certainly not, acceptable today, he taught me a lot of things that I really do admire him for having done so.
For example?
Well, they had me put up first for Soldier of the Month and Soldier of the Quarter, and then ultimately Soldier of the Year. And so now I was competing with all of the other soldiers in 3rd Armored Division. And so my command sergeant major is driving me to 3rd Armored Division headquarters for the final competition. And as we're driving along, the things that this man would say, smoking a stogie, 8 o'clock in the morning, didn't matter. He was smoking a cigar. And he said, I still don't understand why the hell women think they need to be in the military. And I said, it was a conversation, but it was not confrontational. It was just like, this is how he spoke to everybody. And I said, what is the downside of allowing us to serve in the military as well. And he looked at me because he's a very tactical, very combat oriented guy, Vietnam, served in Nam and the whole bit. And he looked at me and said, straight faced, this was not a joke. There are parts of a woman's body that should never be filled with mud. He said that. And that's what I did. Okay. Let me think about that. I have no
I would argue there are no parts of a man's body that shouldn't be filled with mud. But,
I don't disagree there either. But that was him. And but he treated me. I was pregnant twice, and that obviously shortly after had my first child. Returned back. I was 22 years old. Fit as a fiddle. Was back outrunning most of the guys in a month. And then almost immediately thereafter, no amount of contraception seemed to preclude that. I was pregnant again, which the unit hated me. My mates hated me because they thought I had gotten pregnant, so I didn't have to go to the field.
Right.
And I'm like, no, you don't understand. We're using every precaution, sort of celibacy, and that ain't happening. From getting pregnant. And so there were those issues. But he said, you're not sick. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just pregnant. So I went to formation for PT every morning like everybody else did. And as I got further along, but right up in 9 months pregnant, I'm still going to regular PT, which I credit with why my recovery was so quick thereafter. Those of us that are already fit, when you become pregnant, you should make, in my mind, as a nurse, as a clinician, keep it up as long as you can, but listen to your body. But, young and healthy, I had no issues with that.
I don't want to divert to this tangent, but I feel like since you're talking about it, I have to ask you about it now.
Sure.
After 37 years, since the Army has just recently altered their PT test for the umpteenth time again. I've said all along that the Army didn't adhere to a very simple philosophy when looking at their APFT or their ACFT. Don't make perfect the enemy of good, right? Find something that's good. Nothing is going to be perfect. You're not going to find a perfect system that's going to perfectly make everybody comparable on the same level and the same scale. And I say that long story short because they fought like hell to get this one singular test with one set of grades, no male, no female standards. And we're right back where we started with male and female standards again. So round and round we go. I'm just curious your thoughts after 40 years of doing this, now that they finally changed it. I'm sure you're aware of all the changes and everything else, but are you in favor of separate standards for men and women? Does it matter? What are your thoughts?
This is complete, although it's on a podcast, non-attribution. This has nothing to do with any organization, agency. This is Phyllis Wilson, civilian, retired military speaking. I think what we ask our men and women to do in the Army on the battlefield knows no age and no gender. So you either got to put up or shut up. When I got to the point when I no longer could easily, and I wanted to max it, my APFT, it was time for me to drop my papers. I was not going to do an alternate event, and that was my own personal standard. Not everybody feels that way, and not everybody can. So if you need to do the bike or the 2.5 mile walk or whatever the antidote is for what you need to do, I get it. But this is me personally. What we need to do, we train to fight and win America's wars in the United States Army. And if you can't get out on the battlefield and do what you need to do within your career field, then it is a young person's job.
Yep.
That's how I feel about it.
100%.
And I don't think there should be separate standards.
Listen, I don't have any argument. I'm just mad that as a consistent 275 PT guy my entire career, finally I started going old enough where the standards were low enough that I could get into the high 290s. They got rid of the freaking test. So now I'm pissed off because, the last PT test I took, I got a 293 and I'm like, I'm eventually going to max this thing, right? If they keep dropping the standards and I just stay where I am, eventually I'll fall into the max range. Now they got rid of it. So c'est la vie. Anyway, that's just my own personal angst.
Can I just quickly inject?
Sure.
When I went to basic training in 1981, my standard for push-ups to max was 40 push-ups. Okay, great. And, sit-ups likewise, not that dissimilar. 20 years later, with my time in service, they revamped the APFT and it went right back to, at that point, at 40, 41 years of age, to max my push-ups was 40 push-ups all over again. It had declined over 20 years and now they put it right back up because they understood we've got to make sure that our men and women in the military we can somehow find a way to, it's not perfect, to your point, it's good. And does it tell us that they have some degree of fitness to do the things that they have? Now, I understand why some of the new, the ball toss and those kind of things, why those were put in place. It makes perfect sense. If you're trying to hoist somebody up and over a wall or into a window on a higher level, what they're asking you to do here is exactly that. So if you can correlate it to what we need our men and women in the military, in the Army to do, then at least I can buy into it. There's some logic behind it. But yeah, the idea that, and again, I would argue the one thing I felt should change isn't by gender, but by weight. I've got a daughter-in-law that's in the Army, and she is 5'1" and weighs 107 pounds on a heavy day. So that deadlift, if you would say all soldiers, because I fear that you're going to live with long-term skeletal implications, both men and women, when you're asking them to deadlift. I don't know how much you weigh, Mark, but you're more than 107 pounds. And so for you to deadlift something, a man or woman that weighs in their 120s or 130s, is saying, 160 and lower or 150 weight and less doesn't have to deadlift, basically double their weight. I carried rucks that weighed as much as me. I jumped out of aircraft with more weight on me than what I weighed at the time at about 110, 115 pounds. By the time you get all your kit on you, you're humping it out there.
Yep.
And sadly, that may be why my rating with the VA is what it is today. But I wasn't going to quit. None of us are going to quit.
Right. No.
So that's a standard I think we have to look at. And I'm sure there are plenty of women that are rolling their eyes at my conversation right now. But again, this is me as an individual that both from a clinician standpoint and having played the game long enough that I feel I'm qualified to at least speak my mind. I've earned the right to give you my opinion.
Amen. And I asked for it. So if you don't like it, stick it. You can yell at me, not you. Don't yell at my guests. It's kind of the rule of the podcast. Anyway, but no, thank you. In all seriousness, I certainly appreciate, the candor on it. I'm always curious, and again, one of the things that we always hear from people who write into the show is like, get more females, get more, we'd love to hear from more females. And it's great. And I'm like, yes, we try like crazy to get more of them. It's just, it's a numbers game, right? Like only 13% of the military is female. And so we have about like 12 to 15% of our guests are female. So whenever I get a female on, I'm always curious of your thoughts on these things, because again, I don't think we explore enough of that conversation. And again, it could be its own podcast in and of itself. It could be its own episode just to have this conversation. Maybe we'll do it one day down the road. But, I was just, I was curious of what your thoughts were. I didn't want to get off too much more of a tangent, because I do want to hear more about your journey and your story. So after Germany, where are you headed next? And I guess kind of, without fast forwarding too far, like how do you end up in the warrant community? When does that happen for you?
Sure. So I left active duty around Christmas time of 1984, and two little rugrats that had already made it back to the States, and I had to clear everything out of Germany. So I made it home on Christmas Eve in time to hug the babies, because one of them was born in August and now it was December. So I'd been about a month without that little guy, and that was just killing me to get back home. But I had already been applied and accepted into a bachelor's degree in nursing. And my husband was an E6, and he had dropped his warrant officer packet. And what we found out right about then, he was selected. And his first assignment had been in Berlin, Germany. And then the second we had was in Frankfurt together. And so we thought, no worries, I can go to college here in the United States, and I'll just transfer to wherever he's assigned here in the States after 2 back-to-back overseas assignments. Well, you get a reset when you start as an officer. And so all bets were off, and we were going back to Augsburg, Germany the next time. So I did not stay away for 2 years to finish my bachelor's degree. I had completed, even in all the craziness of Germany, the first time I had completed my associate's degree with the 2 little ones in that. And so I just had 2 years to finish a bachelor's. But as fate would have it, my husband was going to be sent right back over to Augsburg. And we just couldn't imagine the family being apart when these 2 little boys were like 1 and 2 years old for me to finish my degree. So I found an LPN program, a licensed practical nurse program, that I could accelerate through. And so we were apart for about 5-6 months. Then I got over to Germany as a civilian, but an Army Reserve soldier. and went through like my PLDC, what is it, Warrior Leaders Course or whatever they're calling it now. That first one, the E4s and E5s go through. So I did that and completed that over in Germany. And when we came back to the States, actually, even then, my husband had promoted to CW2, Chief Warrant Officer 2. And I got a letter from Human Resources Command saying a review of your records indicates that you would be qualified to apply for a warrant. And while I was married to one, I understood the program. So I sent it back in thinking, now I got to do the whole paperwork shuffle like he had. But I guess for the Army Reserve, they were so short, they just scrubbed my records and said, good enough. And told me I was, in fact, selected. But my husband was not on board with this at all. Not at all.
Why?
Because he knew candidate school for warrants was hazing 101, 201, 301, 401. They had got it into the graduate program of hazing at that point in the mid 80s. It was horrid. They would put you in the front lane and rest on gravel for an hour and walk away. So he just didn't want his wife to go through that. And I can appreciate his mentality. But finally, the HRC Human Resource Command told me basically, last chance, we're going to revoke your offer if you don't go. And so I did go. And again, these are the struggles, I suppose, of a dual military. He was adamantly opposed and therefore did not want to, at the time, support even, care and feeding of the kids while I was off to school. So I had to get, his parents to basically provide that kind of coverage. He was still a soldier. He was with 82nd and he was doing all kinds of cool things. And I get that. But, when he would go to TDY or go places, it wasn't a thought. It was just automatic that me as the wife would take care of the kids, the house, go to school, go to work, do everything. So that was part of the beginning of the end, actually, for our relationship, as you can imagine. And so in 1989, I was appointed then as a Warrant Officer 1. And then, of course, 90 strikes. That's Desert Shield, Desert Storm. My husband's at 82nd, and they're one of the first ones to lift and shift early August of 1990. And then I get orders as the day the president is capable of mobilizing the Army Reserve. I get notified to report to Fort Bragg. Fortunately, we lived near there. In 5 days. So again, my in-laws scrambled to get down there to take care of the boys, not knowing what that meant for me.
Ultimately, it means obviously at some point you're leaving because you do end up supporting Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. So, and again, you stayed in the MI community. Obviously, when you went warrant, you didn't leave the MI world. But nonetheless, how does that whole deployment come about? And what are you hearing? What are you told? Where do you go?
Right. So, of course, there's all of the ramp up, and I'd always kept my obviously my clearance was always good. So top secret, all of the extra caveats that go with that for signals intelligence. And then we first reported to 18th Airborne Corps at Bragg and drew all of our issue. And of course, at the same time, my husband is over there in Saudi and you're scared to death. So you're not sleeping, you're checking the television. Thank God we had CNN by then. So we could check it all the time, day, night, because you weren't sleeping. Right. Plus you heard all of the aircraft, whether they were fixed or rotary wing, going overhead in and out of Bragg constantly. And it was just one of those things. And then ultimately, it was like doing intel support for the units that were doing really sticking right along the border between Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And that's really what the mission was. And then, of course, as you know, it was over so quickly, you barely were there for us. And then we turned and we're right back.
Wow. When you get there, is there like any part of you that's like, well, it's a little more than I bargained for originally? Or I kind of feel like you were like pumped to be there.
I was pumped. I was ready. Yeah. It was like the first time I felt like, put me in, coach. You train all this time. And of course it'd been 9 years that I'd been in the service. And, you'd seen the little smatterings of Grenada or Panama, but this was the first big something. And it was the first time that it was the largest forward deployment of women in the military since World War II.
Wow. Over
40,000 women went over in support of Operations Desert Shield and Storm. So, yeah, I was all in.
When you get back, is there a sense of, did males look at you differently because of the experience that you'd had? I mean, do you know, to a point where, you know, you, I don't want to say got more respect from people, but I mean, you know, you had constantly fought this uphill battle as a female to this point. Did any of that change after deployment?
Well, you see, I was in the Army Reserve, so it wasn't like a day-to-day,
right,
you know, sporting a patch or anything like that. So not so much. And again, the unit that I was assigned to, we were plain clothes most of the time, even when we went to our drills. So there was no, and it's a mix and match. People are in and out enough that I didn't notice that. I will tell you honestly, through most of the 90s, and it wasn't until after 9/11 that, then even to this day, for good or bad, and I would argue for bad, a lot of the troops that in the Army that are not sporting a combat patch on their right shoulder, it's not for lack of trying.
Right. Before we get to 9/11, I do want to ask your thoughts on one thing that happened in the military, and it was in 92, 93 at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Sergeant Major McKinney, I think his name was at the time. Long story short, he was, you know, one of the first people exposed for sexually assaulting and abusing female privates at basic training in AIT. And I know this because my basic course at the time was at Aberdeen as an original ordnance officer. So there was an extra emphasis on it there, and, you know, it was well told. But I'm curious to this point, if you're so willing to share about your experience, and had you seen it happen, had you been harassed or assaulted at any point in time in your career? Or I get the sense that nobody wanted to mess with you, but nonetheless, you know, did it happen to other females? Because this became like the first real domino to fall in this whole exposure of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the military.
Yeah. And those are the areas that I do tend to gloss over, no doubt. I'm very proud to be a soldier. I'm very proud of the military, and I'm proud of basically 99.999 of the men that I've had the privilege to serve with. And there's a few jerks. And then one of those was in basic training. And as you know, in basic, you are your NCOs, your drill sergeants rule the roost, and you wouldn't dream of questioning anything. Well, one evening there were myself and three other females that were picked up by a Jeep, back when we still had Jeeps, and we were taken over to like an office building on Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to clean empty trash cans, clean these offices and so forth. And that was our job. Well, we'd probably been there about 5 weeks by the time it was our turn. We'd never heard any rumbling from any of our, one platoon of females, 3 platoon of males in our company, and none of our other females had said it. We've never heard anything. Well, we get there, and while we're cleaning, and we're all in different offices, sure enough, an NCO, not a drill sergeant, but an NCO from Fort Jackson, comes in and closes the door to the office and starts walking towards me as he's unbuckling his belt and says, "I know you've been here for like a month or more. I know you want it." And it took me, even though I was 21, took me a little bit to like, what the hell is he talking about? And so the light bulb went on quickly, and I realized this is not a good situation. And he's an NCO and I'm a private. And I'm like, it's been drilled into us. You don't say anything negative back to them. So I stood there for a minute, and I'm like, "I'm not sure what you're saying." And then he unzipped, because it was back before we had the buttons on our uniforms. He had a zipper, and he unzipped. And I just waited till he got close enough. And I have brothers, and I have kneed them in the groin, and I sure as hell had no problem doing it to him. Dropped him. And then oh my God, I was just trembling. I weighed 104 pounds when I joined the Army, and I am trembling. And I couldn't get the door unlocked to get the hell out of there, but I'm already yelling and I'm hollering. Now I'm like Team Mom, hollering, "Where are they? Where's my girls?" And we all collect, and we double timed it 2 miles back to our unit. It's 9:30 at night. And we go to the orderly, we tell them our drill sergeants come in. Oh my God, are they furious? And at that point in your career, we never heard a follow-up. But based on our 2 drill sergeants, one male and one female, and their furor, not at us, certainly. We had to believe that something was going to happen. But we told all of our platoon mates, and as far as I know, none of us as females ever had to go do that job for the rest of the time that we were in basic training. And the only other time, again, it's times when you're most vulnerable, it seems to me. I was in warrant officer candidate school, and all of the warrants that are training us wear a web belt, sort of like your drill sergeant does. That's their web belt. Now they're in a position of authority. And sadly, yes, the academic in me, I was the only person in my class not on academic probation. So it meant I could get back to the barracks a little bit sooner than everybody else. But we all had to do each other. We did laundry. We had to press our uniforms by hand, So I was pulling people's clothes out of the dryer and just pressing. But we also had one set of showers. So the 2 females in the entire building, and we had our own little room, we had to get showered first in the morning, and then all of the men. So they're pounding on the door, get the hell out of the showers. So you really never showered in the morning. So the good thing was I had privacy as soon as I got back in the evenings. Well, thank God he didn't walk in me on the shower, but I was standing there in like my PT clothes, ironing somebody else's uniform on the ironing board. And he just kept walking closer and closer until suddenly my back is against the wall. And at that point, the light bulb kicks in. He's got the same rank on his chest as my husband. What the hell am I afraid of here? So I pushed him off and said, I don't know what's your problem. And he's like, oh, I'll take my web belt off. And I said, you need to keep it all on and get the hell out of here, because I will. And I did report him. By then now, of course, I was a warrant officer candidate. I'd been a staff sergeant. So not totally wet behind the ears, but I was just certain they were going to dismiss me from the program for standing up, but they did not. And honestly, those are the only 2. But as a registered nurse working in hospitals and in ORs, I can tell you there's plenty of civilian men in the medical community that will grab people's rear ends, especially when you're in sterile conditions. You can't do anything except hold something for the surgeon in your hand. It means your butt is absolutely fair game, apparently. So, I mean, it's not a military issue. Sadly, it's a societal thing. And this thing of boys will be boys is complete BS in my mind, especially when we're willing to give our lives side by side. I should be able to run to anybody that wears the same uniform as me and know that they've got my back, that's the safety zone. And instead, that's where the breach of trust is the biggest thing, I think, whether it's a man that's sexually assaulted in the military or a woman, that breach of trust, that is our brother and sisters in arms. That's where I think the biggest pain is.
Yeah, incredibly well said. And thank you for your candor and honesty on it. I know some of that stuff can't be easy. I'm glad for you it sort of ended better than it had for many other females across the board. And, again, I just took command again, and I make it pretty plainly clear. I tell anybody in reference to sexual assault and sexual harassment, I said, within the limits of my bounds, I will end your fucking career.
I'm with you.
I leave it at that. I said, if you want to roll the dice and gamble, do it. And I will end my career trying to end your career just out of principle. So it's that simple. I don't have any tolerance for it. So we hear that word zero tolerance all the time, but it's empty speak, right? Because if it was zero tolerance, we would have fixed this thing already. But different discussion for a different day. But anyway, thank you for your candor. Okay, so that whole thing happens, and you're dealing with this throughout your career. I'm sure it's it ebbs and flows, right? You come across these guys who like to run their mouth a little bit too much from time to time, and it comes and goes, but you've withstood it all, obviously. So where are you on 9/11 and what happens?
I was working as a nurse when 9/11 happened, civilian, had a beeper on my hip. We were meeting with some leadership within the community where we had a major home health and hospice organization, and I was one of the clinical coordinators for that. And so we were meeting with the public, talking about hospice care. And while we're in this very public forum, back in the day of just two-way pagers, and my pager vibrated on my hip, and I pulled it off, and I saw that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And just a week or so before that, if I recall correctly, a small plane had buzzed like the Statue of Liberty. And I thought it's the same kind of idiot that did that. But when it buzzed the second time, and of course, my Army Reserve unit was up at Fort Meade, Maryland with the National Security Agency. And so we were doing some pretty cool missions already. And when I saw the second one, I instantly knew. And I told people, listen, we've got to stop the meeting. Something horrible is happening to our country right now. And the first thing I wanted to do was just get a TV. I wanted to see what was happening. And my two sons that ultimately after 9/11 in 03 and 04 joined, there were like a junior and senior in high school that day. So it was a family conversation, but it was certainly, I just remember how it felt that day. Who doesn't, right?
Well, you had been to combat. Their father had been to combat.
Yes.
And at this point in time, you guys still married or you had split at this point?
We were splitting.
Okay.
And we were finalizing the divorce during this time.
And I only asked that just because you said you sat down and talked with the kids. Had you guys talked about with the kids in high school and they wanted to possibly join? Were you guys for it, against it? How did that conversation go?
I always feel like, personally, I wish every young man and woman in the country did some kind of service, whether it's in military uniform or for those of us that have been to countries that certainly don't look like the United States. I think there's huge value because we have too many people that they don't understand, these young girls and boys that are worried about even, their roots are growing out or the nail problems or fingernails and, I broke a nail and now my life is ended. And I'm thinking, you got to go someplace besides the United States. And I would love for more service from the time they graduate high school, at least 1 year and ideally 2 years. I think a conscription would be a great thing because even though my boys, and we were pretty firm with them, young men and women can always use a little bit more discipline. And that was a really good thing for them. So I was not going to tell them no. My parents did not tell me no. I think they had their trepidation about it. And I would certainly, knowing that after 9/11, when they signed up in 03 and 04, that they were very likely going to end up truly in a combat zone. Yes, I went to, you say went to combat, but my role didn't put me outside of the wire. Even when I went to Iraq, but I was with Joint Special Operations Command and I felt it can't be any safer than this. All these guys that, I had my weapon and everything, but it was always at the ready. But I was telling the guys, look, I'll reload and I'll just hand my weapon back over to you guys. You guys are better shots than I am. When you run through 10,000 rounds in a year of ammo yourself on the range, you should be pretty doggone proficient.
Right.
When if I'm lucky to get 30 or 60 down range in a year, you can't expect me to be able to do the same as, but I'm happy to be there shoulder to shoulder and do whatever I can do. And it's not that I'm afraid to fire. Some people say, you would shoot another human being? Damn straight I would shoot somebody. If they're coming at me and mine, yes.
Yeah, I've it's them or me. The choice seemed easy and obvious for me. I didn't really have to overthink this one. There was no analysis by paralysis by analysis here on this one. I'll choose my life over the enemy. Thanks. Not a difficult one. So actually, who gets to combat first, your kids or you?
It's about the same time. I actually
Really?
Promoted one of my sons. He was in Taji when I was in Balad.
Oh, wow. What year was this?
This would have been either 06, 07-ish timeframe.
Okay. Well, I was in 05 and 06. I was in Iraq. So Taji and Balad were two of my major destination points from Baghdad. So a lot of miles on the trucks through Route Tampa and whatnot.
Yeah, that's the thing with the logisticians. And actually this past weekend, I spent out in Indiana and spent some time. And Jessica Lynch told her story several times over the weekend. And I asked her about it after the fact, because sort of like the mom in me, like, are you okay? She's like, it actually is helpful, especially as it gets, because the 23rd, just 2 days ago, was the 19th anniversary of the attack that killed 9 and her and so many others were taken POW. And she said it's helpful, especially this time of year, for her to talk it through and get it out. Otherwise, it just festers inside of her.
Sure. So Iraq is before Afghanistan for you?
Yes.
Okay. So when you get to
oddly enough, yeah.
Well, yeah. Listen, I was there for '05 to '06. The surge was in '07 when they had 140,000 people, 140,000 troops, which is absolutely insane number. Different discussion for a different day, nonetheless. But so when you get to Iraq, what are you doing? What's your mission?
Counterterrorism. Okay. I had already started working at Fort Bragg with Joint Special Operations Command, and then they moved us down to MacDill Air Force Base to Special Ops headquarters. And initially, there was about 75 of us. Such a privilege. This was one of the best assignments I ever had. And we were told in early '02 to start, basically, it was the hunt for bin Laden front end. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a year before we got him in March of '03. All of these, it was like what we call the donut. So you had the donut hole, which was bin Laden and Zawahiri, and then the top 7 around him, which was the donut. So the donut hole was the top 2 plus 7. And these were KSM and the others that we were trying to locate. And then I learned a lot about the interagency or lack of interagency work, although we had a joint interagency task force. It tended to be other 3-lettered organizations that we may have located somebody, but they wanted them. And so even JSOC was told to stand down and, this OGA and others would take them on. And so we still continued to get the intel from what they were able to discern as detainees to help us move towards getting the rest. And so that kind of work was, 7 days a week, really long days. And it was the best time because you really felt like you were truly on the tip of the sword with the special operations community.
Absolutely. I mean, that was my first deployment. I was with CJ Sodif in Baghdad. And I always wondered, because I was on the opposite end of it. Like I got to go out on some of the missions with the Green Berets and everything and go on some assaults and raids and everything else. And, that felt like the tip of the spear, but it's the work behind it. That's why I never went MI, because it's my mind doesn't work that way. It's not that I'm not smart enough. I just might, some people are better analytically than others in understanding this stuff. But I'm always fascinated about the amount of hours and everything that you guys put in and how you're following someone that you don't know, surreptitiously or otherwise. And you get to learn everything about this individual through their data footprints, their digital footprints and everything else. And I've just, you have to love that to truly absorb it and do it for 20 hours a day.
You do. And, like I suck at remembering people's names. Anybody, because I didn't have to. It's on your shirt, for God's sakes. I don't need to. I look at your rank. I look at your name. There you go. That's all I need to know. But when it came to chasing the bad guys, it's almost like I had, for that time frame, I can't claim it now, almost like photographic memory. So when we would get their cell phones and we would tear things down and we'd look and we'd find our Dust One's CAC cards on their, the guys that they had taken, their ID cards were on their phones and photos that I'm like, hey, I've seen that picture on somebody else's phone before, not about us, but a lot of porn, a lot of other things. And like, hey, wait a second, I've seen that one before. And so you would get it to the interrogators to say, ask him if he knows this other guy, because we'd figure out which other phone, who the owner of the other photo was that was the same. And I've never heard of him. It's like, well, it's odd that you have this same picture, and we would share it with them. So we had some sneaky ways of getting them to finally pass out.
I always believed, and I wish I had this innate ability when I argue with my wife of knowing the answer to the question before you ask it. Right. Like,
yeah.
I was fortunate enough to, and it was one of the best experiences I ever had. I was fortunate enough to sit in on an interrogation. A couple of them actually, which were, these are crystallized experiences in my mind. But I always remembered, and I always remember thinking, whenever they asked a question, I'm like, he already knows the answer. But this guy doesn't know that he knows the answer. He's already asking, and he's just trying to weed out other information, which again is a level of analytics. I think that, for me, it's like, gallon of information into a shot glass of a brain, like, just things keep spilling out. So it's not my bag. But again, it's just fascinating to watch how you guys work in that sense. And you talk about the tip of the spear, it almost seems like the easy part is kicking down the door and going to drag the guy out and figuring out, the rest of it from there. It's the hours and, because that's 30, 45 minutes, whatever it is of a day, when you guys had 20 hours a day for 3 weeks just trying to find out where the guy is.
And I will tell you, that's when Ambien became my huge friend. And it took me years to get off from that Ambien because of the hype. And then by the time I'm there, I'm in my 40s, and I'm sending these kids in my mind that are the age of my kids. And as the senior intel analyst on some of these missions, and we were taking down 10 objectives a night. So all these choppers, all these dogs, all these guys fully kitted, and it's based on, is my intel good enough? And then you've got to sit there. McChrystal was the commander of JSOC at the time, who I adore, and I would follow him not only to the gates of hell. If he stepped over and said, "Follow me," I would go. I trust him that much. And when the missions would go after all the intel was collected, and we figured which houses were the right ones to go to. Then you had to sit now in the JOC and watch the porn. We called it predator porn, because the drones are over there, and now you see the heat signals of the dogs and the humans that are coming in from the different angles towards the house. And you're just hoping, please God, don't let me see a big explosion. Please God, don't, and sadly, sometimes it didn't work out the way we had, or it was a dry hole, which I'm great with dry holes. It means that they're all going to come home. But it's when they're not, and bad things happen, and we now have memorial services. And you wonder to yourself, I never went out and did any of those missions, and it wasn't my job to do. Did I do everything? Did I miss something? And so you live with that. And that's why Ambien, even after I was back for years, I couldn't sleep. And as a healthcare provider, I'm like, I got to do something. I'm not going to find alcohol. I'm not going to find other drugs. I can only run like 70 miles a week as it was. I can't do much more than that. What do I do? And so finally, I started talking to a couple of physicians about, how do I get off from this? Because I can't sleep, and I'm no good to anybody if I'm not getting at least some degree of sleep. And so I just got my unit, my organization, my leadership to understand that I was probably going to be a pain in the ass for the next month while I get myself off from this, but work with me, because I don't want to take this for life. And I think sometimes you got to be strong enough to tell them. No,
and again, that's an immense amount of courage to be able to recognize it and find an exit plan.
The nightmares that went with it. You take the Ambien, it may put you to sleep, but then you have the nightmares. I'm like, I can't win for losing. There's got to be some way better. And so it made me understand much more in a very visceral way the men and women that check out.
Right.
You do find that ultimate rescue is in suicide. And that's just such a shame. But I understood it far better at that point in my life than I ever did any other time.
So, obviously you get emotional about it, and the ownership of it, I certainly understand. But, you do realize that even if your intel is correct, that doesn't eliminate anything happening on the other side of that tip of the spear, right? Like,
certainly academically, I get it. But I think, we wouldn't be who we are if we just, shit happens. That's it. No, you got to always question, is there something I could do differently? Certainly, especially while I was in theater doing that. But when we came back, we did 4 months down there in Balad, and we came back for 4 months, then we went back again. So it was just this constant cycle. But we were that reach back at SOCOM headquarters. So, because sometimes the computer systems just aren't very speedy in Iraq. And so, it was easier to pick up a secure phone line and call back and get the team here in the States to do that extra work for us. And I think we learned how to do that. But no, you're right. Academically, I haven't let it go, but I also understand that, war is hell and people die, and probably I couldn't have given them anything more. I gave them everything I had. So it's that part of me I can live with. It's not like I was, didn't feel like it today. No, they got everything possible, because I knew it was the same as sending my family out there.
Where are you with it today? How much is there still a guilt that presides?
I think there's always that little bit, but no, it doesn't keep me awake at night, put it that way. I understand. And I think journaling has helped me too, to just put it down and then just say, okay, this is when I have some bad days, just pull it out, write a little.
Did you ever talk to your kids about your experience and that sort of guilt and everything else?
No, not really. Haven't really. I've been more candid here than I probably have any other time.
Oh, well, thank you for that. When your kids had gone and come back, what did they share about their experience with you?
They were a little cryptic at times. I think they tried to protect me from worrying. And I was really okay with them. I knew that they had answered the call. I was proud that they were. I have 4 sons, 2 marriages, 4 sons that are combat veterans, and very proud of every one of them for answering the call when the nation needed us. And I think that's a good thing. But when they were first overseas, in a combat zone, I was okay. But it's that last couple of weeks before they're scheduled to come home, because I have my best friend is a Gold Star mom. And, she lost her son, a West Point kid, Lieutenant Tom Martin, in Iraq. And I just felt like the odds were with the family that at least one of these guys were going to be either horribly injured or killed. And so that last couple of weeks before they were scheduled to come home were just horrible, just waiting for that other shoe to drop. And thankfully, they're all home.
Yeah. 8 days before I left Iraq, I rolled over an IED. So it was, it's that last, minute of the half of basketball where you don't want a bad play to happen or giving up a goal in hockey in the last minute of the period, right? Just let's skate this thing out until the horn sounds and we'll all get out of here. But that fear is real. Trust me. Yeah. So after Iraq, you end up heading to Afghanistan. When and where? Well,
it was really Bagram. Again, it was still with the special ops community. Mm-hmm. And they were really more of a short inserts. I wasn't on a long tour like so many people were. My skill set was such that when we had major, especially media takedowns, a lot of digital, whether it was phones or otherwise, I was able to sift and sieve through things pretty rapidly. And we also worked with the National Media Exploitation Center up in the greater Washington, D.C. area. So being able to make the connect points faster and more furiously to be able to get, these things fall away very quickly otherwise. So when you find a phone that gives you a connect point to a really key high value target, you've got to move fast. And so when we get these treasure troves of data that came in, and one time we had one that was basically the equivalent amount of media as what the Library of Congress is. And so to be able to go through that kind of thing, it took a lot of hands quickly to go through it. And you can't do it all on a computer. Some of it was data that was things that came out of a safe house or something. And so we're just sitting there going through it as fast as we possibly can, looking for that needle in a haystack. And so those were some of my opportunities. Just go fast, be there for a couple of weeks and come back.
In certain case, more like a needle in a stack of needles, but
correct.
Than necessarily a haystack. But that said, when bin Laden is killed, being somebody who's in the intelligence community who worked on that donut that you mentioned before, I don't know if you can say if you were part of that whole thing or not, but you're smart enough to figure out how to word this. So what's your feeling? One, I remember I was actually in Iraq when bin Laden was killed, and I remember my cell phone started buzzing like I had an international plan. It just bzz, 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 and 800 text. Are you coming home now? I'm like, why would I be coming home? Like, where am I going?
Oh yeah, like suddenly everything's over because of that, right?
Everybody ends and everybody gets to go home. And then when I started realizing what was going on, and I turned on the TV and everything, and I kept texting people, guys, that's in Pakistan. I'm in Iraq. Why would I be leaving? Like, I don't understand how you're connecting the two. That's like if there's a traffic jam in Los Angeles, do you not go to work in New York? Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't know what to tell you. So anyway, but I'm just kind of curious where you were and sort of your reaction.
I was not involved in it, and I sorely wish I had been, to be honest with you. Greatly relieved. I was actually on vacation, And my sisters and I had a sister getaway, the same ones that I had cut the hair on their Barbie dolls back in the day. We have all connected properly again. And we had a sister's getaway down in Florida. And it was late in the evening. It was about 11 p.m. our time when we were sitting there. And it was my sister's birthday. It was, early May. So then the president comes on and makes the announcement. And they both look at me because they know my career. And they're like, did you know that? And I'm like, look at my face. Did I know? Because I can't lie for beans. I cannot. And it's like, no, it wasn't me. I wish I had known that it was.
You knew the work that went into that, right? Like you understand the scope of the amount of work that went into that.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Yeah, that was, golly, just amazing. The amount of effort. Can you imagine how many hours just applied to try to locate one human being in this big globe? And you would think technology and everything else, but it just so. But on the obverse of that, you look at the Ukrainian President Zelensky, and thank God, so far he has evaded, because I want to make sure that man continues to survive. And so my hope is that if bin Laden could hold out from us for a decade, please let Zelensky hang out long enough until this craziness that we're going through right now comes out the other side, and we can champion him for the leadership that he's displaying within his own country.
When do you make CW5?
2009.
Okay.
2009. So I'm still at Special Operations Command. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So at that point, when you make CW5, you're still in for another, you're in for 25 years at this point. You never thought about hanging it up then? Like CW, you capped out, right? You can't go anywhere else at this point. Why do you still choose to kick it around afterwards?
I think I was still having a great time. I was loving what I was doing. I was not feeling like I was the one that was slowing anybody down. I was at that point, I was 49 years old when I pinned. And in the Army Reserve, to be fair, the promotions are slower than in regular Army. So, it took me 20 full years from the time I became a W1 until I became a W5. But that is exactly the best you can hope for in the Army Reserve. So I can't complain. Now, had I been regular Army, Compo 1, full-time, I feel confident I might have promoted a little bit faster because they have a different standard than it is in the Army Reserve. So, no, I was still absolutely loving what I did, and just looking for what's my next. And so found that actually, which is what brought me up in 2010 to the Washington, D.C. area. And sadly, and I had fought against ever being up here. I'd never wanted to be inside the Beltway. And now guess where I am? Inside the Beltway, and sure. Loving it.
And is that where you got named Chief Warrant Officer of the Reserves?
That was in 2012. Okay. So I did an assignment up here in between the two. And I honestly had been so close nose to the grindstone working as just an intel analyst that I didn't know that by now the Army had actually put these positions called Command Chief Warrant Officer roles in a myriad of locations. I'd never heard of it. And when I did, I said, and I was watching the things that I felt needed to be improved upon, at least within the Army Reserve and the warrant officer community specifically. Like, I could fix that. Be careful what you say. So I said, when's the guy that's the command chief now? When is he going to retire? Because I'm interested. And, people helped push me along and set up meetings and interviews. And then I was selected in 2012. And then I served that role for 3 years, traveling all over the globe with a 3-star general, commanding general of the Army Reserve. We went everywhere, including, Japan, Korea, Guam, Hawaii, great spots pretty much. And then, of course, we visited our troops in Afghanistan, Kuwait, Iraq, you name it, we were there. So did that kind of wandering as much as we were able to.
For somebody who spent so many years, as you said, with your nose to the grindstone, to get into this sort of role where you're just, I don't want to say a figurehead, but you're not doing that level of grunt work. How hard of an adjustment was that for you?
It was difficult. One, I didn't understand the national strategy like I should have. I should have done more reading, and really, honestly, somebody should have that knew that should have said, "Hey, you want to read this before you get there," because we're up on Capitol Hill. He's testifying. I'm being asked questions. I don't know, but I made myself smart pretty quickly once I realized where my blinders were.
Right.
I didn't understand the difference between military policy and statute law. And so worked very hard to actually make some things change in the legal standpoint within Congress to improve what I believe needed to be improved upon. And then just going out and visiting the troops and really getting a sense of what over 200,000 soldiers and the Army civilians that work with the Army Reserve, what are they seeing? How are they feeling? Are we caring and feeding them properly? And that was really part of that battlefield circulation, which I loved doing, and understanding from them what we needed to do.
Warrant officers are a unique bunch, and they are not exactly easy to produce. I found over my career that, the incredible resource of knowledge that they are, they're wonderful people and never short on a quick-witted word. But beyond that, again, I think there is a barrier to entry to the warrant officer community. I have my own theories as to why, but I'm just curious in your travels what you found out. Why do we struggle so much to make more warrant officers?
Well, I don't know if there's any non-Army that are listening to this. And so certainly we have the other services that have warrants, save the Air Force and now Space Force do not have warrant officers in their ranks, but certainly the sea services do, and they get it. So I would say, 40% of Army warrant officers are aviators. Typically, they start off as rotary wing, but now they can come in straight as fixed wing, so they can fly some of the smaller planes right away for the Army because there's such a shortage of that need. But the other 60% of Army warrant officers are typically, they come from the NCO community. They have already cut their teeth and built their skills. Part of the problem that I came across, and fortunately, when I was the command chief, having somebody like Sergeant Major of the Army, Dan Daly, who worked with Chief of Staff of the Army, General Odierno, they really took to heart some of the things that I was able to share. And this idea that we are stripping from the NCO Corps, NCOs to go warrant, or if you couldn't make E8, then you'll go warrant. No. We're less than 2% of the military, of the Army. And when you think about the total Army, there's over 1 million soldiers, active, guard, and reserve, 1 million soldiers. And there are 25,000 of that 1 million that are warrant officers. And that's from W1 to W5. We truly are this little segment, about 2% of the total Army for all 5 ranks. So to get to W5, there's not many of us, several hundred in the Army. But it's a growth cycle that we've got to find a way to, if you will, cherry pick some of the best and brightest NCOs that exhibit strong leadership qualities that, yes, could become a command sergeant major easily. But we need to pull them out and make them that technical expert, because not only do we have to be really good at our job over decades, we also have to have the wherewithal and the ability to give our senior leaders in the military that gut check, that truth, that we are commissioned officers. And sometimes people say, why did you go commissioned? I am commissioned. I've been a commissioned officer since the day I became a chief warrant officer too. But I'm not chasing the next OER. I'm not worried about some of the same things that our captains and majors and lieutenant colonels might be, and they don't want to piss off the old man, whoever your general is. You're not going to say the things necessarily if you're in a staff position. For those of us, they've always grown up knowing that warrants will sometimes be a little bit more direct than we should be, but we say it because we have the technical expertise and the credentials to back it up.
Yeah. I'm the antithesis of those officers. I say whatever's on my mind. It's probably why it took me 2 years longer to make 06, but again, different conversation for a different day, because I tell you exactly what I think. You can do with it what you want. That said, I agree with you. I've found through my career, NCOs are the biggest barriers to warrants. They are big time deterrence of it. They almost see it's like you're turning your back on the NCO Corps. And a lot of them, sort of beat this narrative of, you're so far along, you can do this so much quicker. Why would you want to start over again, right? And sort of put that narrative in their head. I have told many of my folks, you need to start even though they don't have the technical, the experience factor yet, you need to start recognizing E4s who are groomed to be warrants and catch them before they get sunk in by
you're so
the NCOs.
right.
I got to find E4s and young E5s who just pinned on of people who I need to go look for to go make warrants. Those are the people that I need to carry.
There's warrant officer candidate rank that you wear while you're going through candidate school. And so it says WOC, where normally your rank would be on your uniform. I would always carry those back in the day when we just Velcroed them on, And so I'd carry 2 or 3 in my pocket. So I had coins, of course, to give, but I also had this. And so when I would ask, before we went to meet with a unit, I asked the leadership, who's your best and brightest? Who do you think 3 to 5 years from now would make a great warrant officer? And so they might get a coin, but they would definitely get a handshake. And in lieu of a coin would be that square warrant officer candidate rank. And I would shake their hands. And I said, I understand that someday you're going to wear this. And they put it in their pocket. And I've gotten many letters from those young troops that have said, I put it up either in my cubby at work, or I put it on the ceiling of my car where it'll stick to your the roof of your car inside. And they look at it, and it just kept driving them. And I've been asked to come down and be one of those that gets to put a shoulder board on their shoulder when they graduate down at Fort Rucker. Yeah. And those are lovely moments. But that's the thing. We're not outstripping the NCO Corps. And I'm proud to have been a non-commissioned officer. You can't take that away from me. And that's where I learned a lot of the things that I think you need to do as a warrant officer, especially in a technical community. So thank you for saying that. I think that sometimes we are our own worst enemies, instead of making sure that those that you could see might someday become a command sergeant major at a 4-star level are exactly who do you want to be your W5 someday? You want the dunderhead E5 that, he couldn't make it, so let's make him go warrant. And someday they make it up the food chain and become a leader and senior leader in the Army. I don't think you want that to happen. Pick your best.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of senior leaders in the organization who have a problem letting their best go do other things. I am not one of those people. I have said repeatedly, this job was here before you got here. It'll be here after you leave. We're all going to be fine. We've been kicking this Army thing around for 250 some on years now. We'll be okay. You go do what you want to do. If you're good, go reach for the stars. We'll be fine. We'll figure this thing out. But again, a different discussion. So how do you know after 37 years for you, it's time to hang it up? Or did the Army turn around and say, Phyllis, we're done with you. Go home.
No, I actually could have stayed until 2020. The summer of 2020, but by 2017, actually, I was getting sick. There was something wrong with me, and I knew it. I had done the Marine Corps Marathon the fall before up here in Washington, D.C., but now my last assignment I felt like it was a give back opportunity. So I went down to the Warrant Officer Career College at Fort Rucker, Alabama, to be a senior instructor and to write curriculum for our warrant officers, from candidates through our W5s that come back to the schoolhouse for additional training, a part of our professional military education. And shortly after I got there, man, I knew something wasn't right. And as a nurse and everything, I'm like, something is wrong. I went from running a Marine Corps Marathon in a decent, respectable time frame to I couldn't dry my hair in the morning without having to sit down because I was too fatigued. I'm like, something's not right. And then you go to sick call. And of course, now I'm 56, 57 years old. And the first thing you get by this young doctor, young captain, is a pat on my hand to say, well, you are getting older. And I said, well, not for nothing. I know that. But I did a 4.5-hour marathon 6-7 months ago. And now I can't dry my hair in the morning. If I sit down, because my arms I can't get them up high enough to dry I sit down and I wake up 2 hours later because I'm just that exhausted from getting a shower and trying to dry my hair. Something's wrong. And I had to continue to push. It took several months. And finally, they sent me to a specialist, referred me off post. And fortunately, this man that I fell across, God nudges, perfect. This guy had been a physician, Army physician at BAMC, Brooke Army Medical Center, and dealing with our amputees and our burn victims and all these things. And just as he was getting selected for O5, which meant he was not going to have direct bedside care anymore, they wanted him to move into a research role. He's like, you don't pay me enough for that. I either get to stay with the soldiers or I'm out. So he got out. And to my good fortune, he knew as soon as he looked at my data, he's like, I know what's wrong with you. And it's a disease called primary biliary cholangitis, PBC for short. And it's basically my own body is attacking my liver. And it's basically scarring all of the smaller bile ducts. And so it impacts everything. And because of that, vitamin D in particular is not, for years, I didn't know was not being properly held within my body. So I have the osteoporotic bones of a woman like 90 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, this can't be. I'm a runner. I do weight-bearing exercise. This is everything that's supposed to keep me from that happening. The fatigue, the illness, and in the 1980s, this disease was the leading cause of liver transplantation. But fortunately, they've done enough research that now I take meds every morning and night to slow the progression enough that ideally I may never need a liver transplant. But that also caused other secondary and tertiary problems within my body. And so ultimately, I knew it was time. I couldn't keep up anymore. And that's just not me. So I was like, okay, time to drop some papers.
Sad moment, or just sort of, hey, it happens kind of deal for you?
I'm more of a, I'm pretty easygoing. It is what it is. I was 57 years old when I retired. I had a good ride and I cannot complain. And with the meds that I take and trying to eat and exercise, not as much as I should. I know that. This job that I have now keeps me incredibly busy and far too stationary. But we're doing a challenge with Wear Blue, Run to Remember this week, to remember Lori Piastowa, who died the day that Jessica Lynch was taken prisoner of war. And so we have purpose. And so we're my team and I were in this week, we're racking up 177 miles for the 177 women that have given their lives in combat zones. So we have purpose, and it keeps me moving and doing that. But yeah, I mean, I'll be 62 in May, and it's like, how can that be? In your head, you're never that old, but when you catch yourself in the mirror, you're like, okay, yeah, I see it.
Well, I've lied to my children and told them I'm 35, and they believe that. So whenever I ask them how old I am, they just say 35. I'm like, yeah, you're good. Good job, kids.
Yeah, good for you.
So how do you end up as the president of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation? And is this one of those things that you sort of stumbled in, or was there, because we didn't really always talk about you sort of efforting and championing women. You spent so much time championing yourself throughout your career that...
Well, I sucked at championing myself, and you can tell that if you look at my awards and decorations. I just was busy doing my job.
Right.
Like
okay. So that's
right?
That's what I meant to say. Like that came out wrong. You were so focused on your career that you didn't really devote your time to others the way this job as the president of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation requires. Yeah. So
now, as far as mentoring in the military, I would like to think I was pretty doggone good at making sure mentoring and coaching and pushing people to see that there was more to themselves and asking them to step up to the challenge. And I guess I try to hold myself along the same lines. And yes, my opportunities to go airborne and all of those things, it wasn't like, oh, look at this female doing it. No, I'm a soldier, and that was my opportunity. I'm wearing a maroon beret at Fort Bragg, and I don't have jump wings. That's wrong. So in my mind, when I finally got the opportunity to go to jump school, I'm going. And I was 32 when I went, and it was great. And so I was so busy proving that I was a good soldier and not bad for a female. No, Good soldier. And so I actually had no plans whatsoever of doing anything with the Military Women's Memorial, which is beautiful. And I knew about it. I didn't learn about it until 2013, and it had already been open for 15 years, 16 years. And then I hear about it because I was busy. And it just wasn't in my wheelhouse, to be honest with you. But after I retired and I was back up here working as a contractor in the Army G2 in the Pentagon, I had crossed paths with some of the people that were involved with the Military Women's Memorial and been to events, promotions, retirements, both men and women. It's a beautiful location at the entrance to Arlington, right? And but as fate would have it, somebody had hit me up about potentially applying for the role of president here. And I said, I'm not that interested. But that, again, was one of those moments where I parked in a veteran parking spot and somebody challenged me for having done so. And I went into the store after the fact. I thought, if it'd been a guy, served or not, that parked in veteran and got out, that other gentleman would not have asked him, hey, are you sure you're a veteran? Right. But I got challenged on it. And I thought, wait, I've done my time. And so I didn't want to be rude to him. We had the conversation. But when I got inside, I said, we are not there yet. We still, and why is this memorial here? Because our story and our phase lines are very different than our male counterparts in the military. When a woman took a musket ball in the thigh in the Revolutionary War because she was disguised as a man, she dug it out herself rather than be found out to be masquerading as a man defending her own country. And it's continued really for a very long time. General George Washington, Revolutionary War. Our first woman general is in 1970. There's huge differences, and it's not right or wrong. It's how society viewed it and how society and laws were put in place to then ultimately afford us now. Every career field is open to us. If you're good enough and you can meet the criteria, please don't lower the standards. We will come through. There will be some that make it through. But there's a lot of men that wash out in some of these more onerous and difficult things. And good on them for trying, because the things that I had the opportunity to at least attempt and fail were things that I will never look back on and say, I wish I had at least tried. I tried, but failure is part of the lesson plan. And if anybody doesn't have any failures in their book, they're wrong. You do. You've tucked them away someplace because they made you feel bad for a moment. But for me, anytime I didn't do whatever I had set out to do, it was still challenge accepted. Okay, I didn't get it this time. Wait for it. I'll do it next time. Or I'm going to move on to the next. If you decide that's not that much in your game plan. But I think that for me, once I had the opportunity, thank God that guy challenged me because it was just a couple of days before the deadline to apply. I put it in, and be careful what you ask for. So now here we are, 2.5 years into this role, and I'm loving it. The things, 37 years, I never knew about the strength of women in the military for 250 years. Never knew it. I know it now, and I'll continue to learn every day for the rest of my life about these incredible women that for too long were marginalized. Their stories were not told, and that's what we do at the memorial. We honor and tell the stories of those 3 million women, plus growing every day, which we love to be able to do that and shine the spotlight on their stories.
Well, hell, listen, we'd love to help here on the Hazard Ground. Send us more. Send us you're tired, you're weary, whatever you know how it goes. Send them all to us because that's very similar to what we're doing here. We just want to tell these stories of everybody who served in uniform, and certainly the role of women is increasing, which is a great thing. It's funny, I've never really come across a female who couldn't cut the mustard any more so than a male who couldn't cut the mustard, right? Like, I mean,
right.
Anybody who couldn't do the job, I didn't look at it because she was a female. I just looked at it because, like, you're lazy, you're a bad soldier. Like, it never, but they're all over the place. But I do think there is a certain amount of, people in my position have to actively recruit for certain things. I remember as a battalion commander, I had an opening command come up, and I told everybody, I want female nominees. Find them. Go search for them and find them. Bring them to me. I'm not saying they're going to get it, but find them. Search out people who haven't had an opportunity yet and bring them to me. And I think that's, the biggest part of my responsibility is to make sure that we look for the individuals because they're around. Yes, there are much smaller numbers. Again, as I mentioned earlier, 13% of the Army is female. So I'm going to have 87 males for every 13 females. So
Right.
it's easier to find the males, but it is my responsibility as a leader to grab some of those 13 and say, I want you to apply for this position. I want you to work here. And I believe that truly that's the best I can do and the most that I can do. But I'd love to judge everybody on the same merit and let their resumes and their careers, much like yours did, speak for itself. But when push comes to shove, it's my job to afford the opportunity to everybody equally.
Yeah, and I would say too, please, the idea of selecting somebody based on a gender because you feel like you need to, the diversity matrix isn't perfect. I worked hard all my life, and as have so many men, and it would just, I don't want an opportunity at the detriment of somebody that was better qualified and would have done potentially a better job than me. Don't give it to me because there's some kind of quota in the mix. It's like either I'm the best for the job that has applied, because I'm sure there were other people that would have and could have done a better job than I'm doing right now as the president in my current role. But if you didn't apply, tough luck. I'm the best that came to them at the time, at least according to the search committee. And so now the pressure is on to prove that their trust in me is in fact worthy. And I can't let 3 million women down, can I? I have to step forward and keep telling their stories of in tribute to what they've done when it was incredibly harder than it is now. Well, granted, we're asking women to do anything and everything. Women did everything and anything they were allowed to do in generations gone by. And good for them, because that's the shoulders that I get to stand on that gave me the opportunities that I saw. And when I have these young cultural support team women that are rangers, I have a picture right beside me. The closest photo is me standing with the first 2 women rangers, Shay and Chris, at their induction into the Army Women's Foundation Hall of Fame. I mean, these are big deals. And if you can see it, you can be it. And I never really fully grasped that until one time when I was in Afghanistan and we were visiting troops. And this group of NCOs came up and asked if they could get a picture. And I'm standing beside my 3-star. And he sort of gives them the hand for a second. He's like, I'll be with you in just a second. And they start shaking their head. No, her. We want a picture with her. And he's like, oh, okay. Because they said, we've never seen a female CW5. And this is something we could, as NCOs, we could be that someday.
Right. Yeah,
so,
awesome.
I'm like, oh my gosh, it was my first moment of feeling like, sir, I just beat you on your same game. So it was fun to get that picture and then take the time to talk to them and encourage them to consider this kind of an opportunity and what that means. But also, you're going to be standing shoulder to shoulder and giving advice to senior leaders in the military someday if your career goes long enough. But It's been a great opportunity, and I wouldn't have changed a minute of it.
No, and I think the other thing too that I'm charged with is to continue to advocate for the outstanding females. I had a support operations officer who worked for me, and the minute my brigade commander had said to me when I was the XO, it said, "Hey, I have a command opening up. Who are some of the names that you think of?" And immediately, and even though she had just pinned on 05, I said immediately, I gave her his name, her. She's the perfect person for that job. Like, those are the opportunities that you don't want to miss to help advocate for the stellar females that are among our ranks. And I didn't choose her because she was a female. I chose her because she was an outstanding leader and an outstanding officer. And she was the first person that if I had the opportunity to choose to work with again, I would choose her because she is excellent at her job. But it's those sort of things, I think, that sometimes we swing and miss as the males in our organization. We default to not thinking of those people first. But it's much like she was so outstanding that it was easy for her to stand out. Like, you could tell who the superstars are. And it's like you said, I want the superstars to be in superstar positions. It's not that I'm looking for the mediocre individual. I want the best people to do the best jobs, to do the toughest jobs, because that makes everything around them better. And I think that's another area of focus where, leaders in the military sort of have to advocate for those individuals.
I couldn't agree more. And that's so important that we we do that, and not out of a sense of duty, but it's always meant a lot to me when somebody said, you were the first one I thought of when, if they needed an answer on something. We're supposed to be the subject matter experts. We are the technical experts in the Army. And if you can't, and the great thing is, because we're such a small cohort, 25,000 strong across all three combos, we know each other. And all I need to do is be able to phone a friend. I don't need to know it. I need to know who knows it. And we have that kind of a network and a safety that we'll always have each other's back. And I used it when I was at Special Operations Command, whether it was other intel soldiers, logisticians, things that I didn't think about. How are we getting supplies there? Even photos. When they needed imagery before they were going to go do a mission, and we'd pull it down, but it's like, oh, wait a second, especially in a terrain that actually had trees. If I had imagery and the best I had was in a deforested or de-leafed environment, there were no leaves on the trees, but guess what? There's leaves on the trees now. It's problematic. I can't tell people the same kind of look and feel. So being able to reach out to other organizations, other individuals in the warrant community going, hey, I need a picture that looks like it looks today. So as our teams are getting ready to go, they know what to expect, because they need to know if they need to fire on something, if they need to shoot at something, are they going to be able to see through? If there's no leaves on the trees, you're probably going to see through a little bit better. But if it's fully leafed out, it's going to make an impact. Are they going to be able to use it for their own cover? Or are they going to be able to see through to what it is? So it makes a big difference. And these are things that I would never have learned had I not taken the time to sit with the operators, more than just say I'm in my little intel silo and I'll give you the information. But I learned very quickly there were things to know, whether streams and creeks were running or not at a time of year that these guys were going to go into areas, as well as I used my medical background when we had teams when South Ossetia and that happened in 2008. Teams were told to fall back. Well, if they had to go to a different country, the problem was we had only given them the intel medically of what was going on within the country they were in. And so we learned to always look at all of the neighboring nations. And so if there was an outbreak of any kind of disease or illness, they knew that. And the medics always carried extra things in their kits. So in case there was a fallback plan, we had some pieces in their kit for them to cover down. But there's all those ancillary things that it just takes that second and third order thinking that thankfully, and I think, sometimes you think 20 years and out. If I had done 20 years and out, I would have never developed that degree of thought pattern that got me through that. And that's why sometimes I think there is value in those of us that can stick it out and serve for 30, 35, 40 years, that knowledge, or you convert over into civilian and continue to play the same game, but in a different way.
What's the best way people can support the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation?
Sure. So the Military Women's Memorial is operated by the foundation, which I'm president of, and it is a 501c3. And we rely completely on the generosity of America to keep this beautiful building, which the front wall was built in 1932. And then behind it is think of it as a museum. It's an education center. And to maintain all of that, as well as all of the artifacts that we have, think of Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end in the warehouse. That's us for all women's military items. So to care for that, curate and store, maintain, it takes a lot of money and we need your help. And so simply you can go to womensmemorial.org, just womensmemorial.org, and you'll see a donate button on that, as well as you can learn so much more about the exhibits and the stories that we share in the memorial itself. And please, if you're in the DC area, come visit us. If you're at Arlington already, that rooftop, for anybody that's looking at the photo that I have behind me, that rooftop there is the best view in town. We have nothing between us and the Lincoln Memorial as you look towards the city. So wow. Lincoln Memorial, Washington Memorial. And then if you did an about face and looked up the hill behind us, it's the white grave markers that remind us the price that we all, that those have paid to keep us free.
What would CW5 Phyllis Wilson tell, whether it's Private Phyllis Wilson, Sergeant Phyllis Wilson, WO1 Wilson, the crossroads of her career? What would you go back and tell her about the toughest moments in her career?
It's interesting because I made them the toughest on myself just because I guess my fear of failure, So whether I was going through Defense Language Institute and I had this stupid thing where I always felt like I had to be first in class, first in whatever, first in for, and fortunately over time.
Yeah, that's a stupid thing, by the way.
Well,
no, it's not.
It can be detrimental to a degree where when you don't end up top of class, top of whatever in your second or third or fifth, 10th, 20th, what do they call the person that graduates with the lowest ranking in med school?
Doctor.
That's right. So, the thing is, sometimes I would put too much on when my husband broke his back in Desert Shield, Desert Storms, caring for him and his PTSD and two little boys that are rambunctious little boys. And I was in nursing school at the same time, and it's like you're trying to balance all this, but I still wanted straight A's. And after a while, you're like, a B is okay. It's all right if you get a B in a class, you're still going to graduate, you're still going to be a registered nurse, let it go. So it's all of those things that I think I would tell myself, you don't have to be number one at everything, but you have to push yourself to be the best you can be at any given phase in your life when you balance it across your everything that's on your plate at the same time. In a silo, yeah, I could have maybe been top of my class and whatever. I could have been a better runner. I could have, but when you're trying to be that whole person, everything, the super mom, the everything, there comes a time when you've got to say, what am I willing to accept that I am not going to be best at? And then sort of hold in your heart, well, maybe I would have been if I didn't have this, and this, but it's okay. But I think some of the challenges that the Army put in front of me, I know for a fact it's what made me who I am today. And I wouldn't have wanted it to be any easier. If anything, I would have loved to have had some of the opportunities that I see our young women have today. But that's a migration, and we're going to continue to watch that as it morphs and changes over time too. So I wouldn't tell me change anything.
You have 4 boys. What's the biggest lesson that you've had to teach them about women in the military or even women in general? Like what's the one thing that you remind them of consistently about how men and women should or are supposed to interact both in a professional and personal setting?
Oh, good question. I have, a total of 8 kids blended. Mm-hmm. So I have the 4 boys that are combat veterans. I have another son, Jesse. He's the youngest. He chose not to join the military, and then 3 daughters. And so love every bit of all of this. It's so much fun. But what I would actually put that back on its ear is because my boys trust me, my young, my oldest son is 38 or 39 now, in talking with them, I found that it's not just, I think sometimes women think that, well, we have to try harder to be as good as the guys. And I never felt like I had to try harder. I always put myself up against my own yardstick. This is where I want to be. And, but most of my sons have been forthright that they sometimes suffer that same imposter syndrome, that one of them now is much more fit than he's ever been. And he's been a first sergeant like 4 times. But he always felt like he wasn't as good because some of the other first sergeants were just gazelle runners. And he's great on push-ups and sit-ups, but running, he'll run till he pukes because that's what we do. But he was never a fast runner. And now because he's changed how he does his cardio and everything, he really only runs for the physical fitness test, but he runs way faster because he's totally changed what he does, a lot more rowing and things that he's learned over time. But they all seem to feel this sense of I'm not as good as my peers. And so I think that's something that I want a lot of the women that are listening to this to hear too. It's not just us, and certainly not just us in the military that think, well, we have it harder or we have. I'm telling you, for men that are very accomplished in their own rights within the military and in their own lives suffer the same thing. And I'd like to think it's not hereditary. It's just that thing of we push ourselves to prove that we're there, that we're equal, that we're as good as. And I think that's a human nature. And you could argue it's a human flaw. but it is what it is. And so when I go to a lot of women's events where women, will talk about how much harder it is for us. And certainly on the physicality, in some cases, that may be the case. But I think our mental status of wanting to be the very best and definitely we know we wear the cloth of this nation. And so wear it with pride, wear it in a way that when anybody else that is not in the military sees you, you leave a really good signal of what being in the military means. And to me, that was always important.
Well, perfect words to end it on. Again, womensmemorial.org is where you guys can go to check out everything that you need to do, help support, donate, and do whatever you feel comfortable doing to, again, support this cause. It's admirable what you've undertaken at this point in your life, given everything that you have gone through already. And certainly, hearing your story over the past, hour plus, almost 2 hours now has been incredible. I am honored to have been side by side with you here in this discussion, just because I think that it's so important that we continue to have people like you continue to lead from the front and do the things that are necessary for not only women, but just for all service members to get a better understanding of how our service operates, where we've come from, where we are, where we're going. And I think the wealth and breadth of experience that you have and the knowledge that you have is unmatched. And I've learned a lot, and I'll take a lot of the lessons that you spoke of and carry them forward with me. But I continue to wish you nothing but great health, continued success, and continue to make the Women's Memorial something that everybody is cognizant of, aware of, and something that we're obviously proud of. But that's right up there with every other memorial in DC that they go see, because that really is what we need to happen. We need to take this knowledge that's in there and make sure it's commonplace to everybody. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Phyllis Wilson, thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
You've been listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.